Jake Marston had always believed that a real cowboy kept moving no matter what the day threw at him. Sunrise to sunset, dust storms or winter winds, sore muscles or long nights, he pushed through it all because the ranch needed him. That morning, the sky was clear, and the cattle were restless after a week of storms. Everyone knew the roundup would be rough, but Jake saddled his horse with his usual easy confidence, brushing off the tiredness in his bones. He didn't mind hard work. He never had. The herd was scattered across a wide stretch of open land, and the ground was still soft from the rain. Horses slipped now and then, and cows moved slower than usual. Jake guided his mare, Ruby, through the uneven field, nudging her gently with the reins. He had done this 1,000 times, and even though the job was tiring, there was something peaceful about being out there with nothing but the wind and the cattle for company. But peace didn't last long that day. A young bull, irritated and confused, suddenly bolted away from the group. Jake reacted quickly, turning Ruby sharply to chase after it. She lunged forward, hooves kicking up wet dirt, and Jake leaned low over the saddle, urging her on. The bull darted left, then right, unpredictable and fast. Jake kept steady, trying to cut it off before it disappeared into a thicket of brush. Ruby jumped over a shallow ditch, but when she landed, her hoof slid on the wet ground. The slip wasn't bad, but it was just enough. Jake felt the saddle tilt, his balance shift, and in one pounding heartbeat, he was falling sideways. He hit the ground hard on his left side, a sharp jolt shooting through his ribs like a hot wire. His breath left him in a rush. Ruby stopped immediately and stood nearby, ears pinned back in worry, but all Jake could hear for a moment was the ringing in his head and the throb of pain spreading under his ribs. He rolled onto his back slowly, breathing shallowly because deeper breaths hurt too much. He tried to sit up, but even that sent a sharp sting across his chest. He clenched his jaw and rested a hand against his side, trying to convince himself it was nothing. Cowboys fell all the time. He'd fallen harder before. He just needed a minute, that's all. When he finally stood, the world tilted for a second, and he had to grab Ruby's reins to steady himself. He stroked her neck with his free hand, whispering that he was all right, even though he wasn't sure if it was true. But there was work to do, and he wasn't about to let a little pain stop him. He climbed back into the saddle, breath tight, and continued the roundup with the others. By the time the cattle were brought in, the sun was slipping behind the hills. Jake pretended everything was fine, keeping his breathing quiet and his movements small. He knew the ranch hands well, and they knew him. If even one of them saw him wince, it would spread across the ranch quicker than wildfire. Someone would insist he rest. Someone would tell the foreman. And Jake hated fuss more than he hated pain. So he kept to himself, doing his chores slowly but steadily, hoping the ache in his ribs would fade with time. But the longer he worked, the worse it got. A deep, dull throb stayed beneath every breath, and sharp flashes came whenever he bent, lifted, or turned too quickly. By evening, he could hardly stretch his arm without feeling like something inside him was being pressed with a hot stone. Still, he didn't stop. As the sky darkened and stars began to show, Jake made his way to the barn. He told the others he was checking on a mare that had given birth the previous week. No one questioned him. Jake cared for the horses more than most people he'd met, and the idea of him checking on a mare late at night was nothing unusual. Inside the barn, the air was warm and smelled like hay and leather. Lantern light glowed softly along the wooden walls. Jake walked slowly to the back stall, but halfway there he had to stop, pressing his hand to his side again. He leaned against a wooden post, breathing shallowly, trying to calm the stabbing pain. He wasn't sure anymore if the rib was just bruised or something worse. It felt like pressure was building beneath his skin, like the bone itself had cracked. He bent forward slightly, eyes shut, and stayed like that for a long moment. From behind him came soft footsteps, the kind that belonged to someone gentle and attentive. Jake straightened a little too quickly and hissed under his breath as pain shot through his ribs. "Jake?" a quiet voice called. He knew that voice. Elena Ruiz, the visiting veterinary nurse from town. She had been at the ranch all week to help with the injured horse, and everyone liked her. Kind, patient, always paying attention even when no one realized she was watching. He turned toward her, trying to look normal, but the lantern light showed just enough of his face for her to notice something wasn't right. Her eyebrows lifted with concern. "You're still out here?" she asked, stepping closer. "I thought everyone had finished for the night." Jake forced a small smile. "Just checking on the mare," he said. But his voice sounded tight, and he knew it. Elena's eyes narrowed slightly, studying him the way she studied injured animals, carefully, quietly, with a patience that could make anyone tell her exactly what was wrong without meaning to. "Did something happen today?" she asked softly. Jake shook his head, which was a mistake. The movement tightened the muscles in his chest, and he inhaled sharply, a small sound slipping out before he could hide it. Elena heard it. She stepped closer, her tone gentle but firm. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he insisted, trying to straighten but failing when another wave of pain hit. He braced himself against the stall door, trying not to let the weakness show. Elena didn't look convinced. "Jake, what happened?" He hesitated. He didn't like admitting weakness, not even to himself. But the truth was, he had reached the end of his strength hours ago. The pain was too sharp now, too tight, crawling up into his ribs and down into his back. He couldn't keep pretending. He lowered his head, his voice barely above a whisper, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "It hurts." Elena moved immediately, her expression shifting from concern to gentle understanding. She didn't overwhelm him with questions. She didn't panic. Instead, she placed a calm hand on his arm, offering steady support. "Then let me help," she said quietly. "You shouldn't be standing here alone like this." He almost told her he didn't need help, that he'd be fine, that he could walk it off, sleep it off, do anything except admit how close he was to collapsing. But Elena's voice wasn't pitying. It didn't make him feel small. It made him feel noticed, something he wasn't used to. He nodded slightly, and she guided him to a stack of hay bales near the corner of the barn. He sat carefully, each movement slow, and Elena crouched in front of him, her eyes level with his. "Let me see where it hurts," she said. Jake hesitated, then lifted his hand from his side. Her expression softened when she saw the way he held himself, the shallow breaths, the tightness around his eyes. "You should have told someone," she murmured, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear as she examined him from a respectful distance. "You shouldn't deal with this alone." "I didn't want to bother anyone," he muttered. "You're not bothering me," she replied. The barn was quiet except for the soft rustle of hay and the occasional shuffle of horses settling in for the night. Elena stayed close but not intrusive, letting Jake take his time. He was used to being the strong one, the one who helped others, the one who didn't ask for assistance. It felt strange to be on the receiving end, but Elena made it feel almost natural. She sighed softly. "Jake, I think your rib might be cracked. You need rest. Real rest." He nodded again, weaker this time. The stubbornness he usually held like armor was slipping away, replaced by exhaustion he could no longer hide. Elena moved a little closer, her voice warm and steady. "I'm here. Just breathe slow." For the first time that day, Jake let himself ease back, letting someone else take the weight he'd been carrying alone. Elena stayed by Jake's side, watching his breathing with careful attention. She had seen many injured animals and a few injured people during her work, but something about Jake made her extra cautious. Maybe it was the way he tried so hard not to show pain. Maybe it was the quiet strength he carried even when he was struggling. Or maybe it was simply because she had noticed him all week. How he helped everyone else. How he always put the horses first. How he never complained. Jake sat on the hay bale with one hand pressed lightly against his ribs. The lantern above them cast a warm glow, filling the barn with soft shadows that made the place feel calm and safe. The horses rustled gently in their stalls, adding small, soothing sounds to the still night. Elena placed a folded blanket beside him so he could lean back more comfortably. "You need to stay still for a bit," she said softly. "Even breathing too deeply can hurt if a rib is cracked." Jake tried a small smile. "Feels like that's true." She noticed how he spoke in short sentences, each word carefully measured so he wouldn't take in too much air. His face looked a little pale, but his eyes stayed focused, steady, and respectful. He wasn't one to exaggerate pain. If he said it hurt, she knew it had to be bad. "Can you tell me where exactly it hurts?" she asked gently, sitting on a small wooden stool across from him. He moved his hand an inch to the left side of his rib cage. "Here. Mostly when I breathe or move too fast." Elena nodded. "May I check it? I won't touch too hard." Jake hesitated only a moment before nodding. He trusted her more than he trusted most people, even though he hadn't known her long. Something about her calmness made him feel like he didn't have to pretend around her. She moved slowly, her fingers hovering gently near the area he showed. She never pressed down, she just traced the outline lightly, watching his reactions. When she reached the tender spot, Jake let out a small breath through clenched teeth. "Sorry," she whispered immediately. "It's fine," he murmured, voice soft. She pulled her hand back gently. "It's definitely sensitive. You've probably cracked the rib. It needs care, rest, and support." Jake let his head tilt back against the wall behind him. "I don't have time to rest." Elena folded her arms. Not in anger, but in a patient way that made Jake glance at her. "Your ribs don't know that," she said quietly. "Your body doesn't care how much work you have tomorrow. It needs time." He let out a slow, shaky breath. "I know, I'm just used to pushing through things." She smiled gently. "I noticed." Jake looked at her for a moment, taking in the softness in her expression. She wasn't judging him. She wasn't lecturing him. She just cared, and that was something he wasn't used to from anyone other than the people he worked with every day. And even they didn't care like this. Elena stood up and went to a small storage shelf where the ranch kept basic supplies. She took out a soft cloth, filled a metal bowl with cool water from a pump inside the barn, and returned to Jake. "I'll help you until the pain calms a bit," she said. "Just stay still." He nodded again. She dipped the cloth in the cool water, wrung it out, and placed it gently against his ribs, not pressing, just letting the coolness rest there. Jake breathed out slowly. The cold helped. Not much, but enough to ease the sharp edge of the pain. "Thank you," he whispered. "You don't have to thank me," she said. "Anyone would help." "Not everyone," he replied quietly. Elena met his eyes, and there was something sincere there that made her heart soften even more. She sat beside him on the hay bale, close enough to support him if he leaned, but not crowded. She kept the cool cloth in place with one hand and used the other to steady him whenever he shifted. A few minutes passed in quiet. The barn felt peaceful. The horses occasionally nudged their stalls, as if checking on the two humans sitting quietly in their space. Jake looked around slowly. "You ever get tired of being around animals all day?" he asked, trying to distract himself from the pain. "Never," Elena replied with a smile. "They're honest. They don't pretend to be okay when they're not, and they don't hide when something hurts." Jake huffed a tiny breath, which made him wince. "Are you saying I'm less honest than a horse?" She laughed softly. Her laughter was calm, warm, and light, and for a moment it made Jake forget the pain. "Maybe just a little," she teased gently. "At least today?" Jake shook his head slightly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Guess that's fair." Elena dipped the cloth again to cool it and placed it back. "You know," she began softly, "you don't always have to be the strongest one in the room." "I don't?" he asked with quiet humor. "No," she said, turning her head to look at him. "Sometimes being strong means letting someone help." He didn't respond right away. He looked down at his hands, rough and calloused from years of ranch work. He wasn't someone who leaned on others. He wasn't someone who asked for comfort. He had learned long ago that people expected him to take care of himself. But as Elena sat beside him, steady and kind, he felt something inside him ease. "You're good at this," he whispered finally. "At what?" she asked. "At being kind, even when someone is stubborn." She smiled shyly. "Thank you. But I'm not doing anything special." "You are to me," he said before he could stop himself. Elena blinked, surprised. Jake rarely spoke from the heart, and when he did, it was quiet, serious, and sincere. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, but she didn't let it show too strongly. Instead, she moved the cloth again and said softly, "I'm just glad you're letting me help." Jake shifted slightly in his seat, trying not to wince. "Feels strange," he admitted. "What does?" she asked gently. "Letting someone see that I'm hurting," he said, voice barely louder than a breath. "I don't usually do that." Elena watched him for a moment. "You can with me," she whispered. Jake felt his throat tighten, not from pain, but from something else he didn't quite understand yet. Her voice had a softness that wrapped around him like a warm blanket. It wasn't pity. It wasn't pressure. It was comfort. A few minutes later, Jake leaned forward slightly, and Elena instinctively moved to support him, placing her arm behind his back so he wouldn't fall forward. "Careful," she murmured. "Move slowly." He nodded, letting her guide him back against the wall. Her arm stayed around him, steady and warm, and without thinking, Jake leaned a little more into her support. Not fully, just enough to ease the ache. Elena didn't pull away. Instead, she adjusted her position so he could rest more comfortably against her shoulder. Her voice dropped to a whisper, gentle as a lullaby. "Then let me hold you till it stops." Jake let out a slow breath, and for the first time since the fall, he felt some of the tension leave his body. He wasn't fully relaxed. Pain still lingered, but he wasn't fighting it alone anymore, and that made a world of difference. He closed his eyes, not in exhaustion, but in trust. Her presence was calm enough to allow him to rest without fear of collapsing or being judged. It felt safe, something he didn't feel often. Elena supported him with patience, keeping her arm steady around him. She didn't talk much. She just stayed with him, warm and real, letting her quiet company fill the space. The barn felt softer, the night gentler, and Jake felt himself drifting into a lighter state, where pain wasn't the only thing he noticed anymore. He whispered, "I didn't know this could help so much." Elena whispered back, "You don't have to face everything alone, Jake." He slowly opened his eyes and looked at her, gratitude shining through the pain. "Thank you for being here. I'm not going anywhere," she replied softly. And she didn't. She stayed right beside him, holding him steady, letting him rest, letting him breathe without fear. Outside, the wind was quiet, and inside, the barn had never felt so peaceful. The barn stayed warm and calm as Jake rested against Elena's shoulder. The pain in his ribs hadn't vanished, but the sharpness had softened. It felt different now, less like he was carrying it alone, and more like someone was sharing the weight with him. He didn't know how long they stayed like that, but the quiet moments stretched in a peaceful way he wasn't used to. Elena kept her arm around him, steady and gentle. She didn't rush him, didn't tell him to sit up straight, didn't force him to breathe deeper. She just stayed close, letting him lean however he needed. Jake wasn't the type to depend on anyone, but being held like this didn't feel weak. It felt grounding, almost like the world had slowed down just enough for him to breathe without fear. A soft rustling came from a nearby stall as one of the horses shifted, settling down for the night. The smell of hay, leather, and warm animals wrapped around them like a blanket. Jake had spent years in barns just like this, but this night felt different. Warmer somehow. Safer. Elena looked at him with gentle eyes. "Your breathing is calmer," she wrote. "That's good." Jake nodded slowly. "It's because I stopped trying to fight everything." Her smile was soft. "Sometimes you don't have to fight. Sometimes you just let yourself rest." He let out a breath, slow and careful. "I'm not good at that." "That's why I'm here," she said. Jake blinked at her words, feeling a warmth he couldn't quite explain. He wasn't used to people offering to stay with him like this. He wasn't used to anyone choosing to be near him when he was hurting. Most of the time, he made sure nobody even noticed. For a while, they sat quietly. The lantern above them flickered a little, casting dancing shadows across the wooden floor. Jake's eyes drifted closed from time to time, not because he was falling asleep, but because it felt peaceful enough to rest them. Elena adjusted the blanket behind him so he could lean more comfortably. Her movements were slow, thoughtful, and careful not to jostle him. "How long has it hurt this badly?" she asked softly. "Since the fall," he said. "It got worse as the day went on." "You should have stopped then," she said. Jake lifted his head just a little to look at her. "If I stopped every time something hurt, I'd get nothing done." She shook her head lightly. "There's a difference between being sore and being injured. You know that." "Yeah," he admitted. "I just don't like to make a fuss." "You're not making a fuss," she said gently. "You're just human. Humans get hurt." He smiled faintly. "Cowboys sometimes forget that." She returned the smile. "Then they need reminders." Jake rested his head back against her shoulder. He felt her steady breathing, slow and calm, and it helped him match his own breaths to hers. The pain didn't disappear, but her presence kept it from overwhelming him. After a moment, Jake whispered, "You're very patient." "I work with animals all day," she replied quietly. "Patience is part of the job." "Still," he said, "I'm grateful." Elena looked down at him, her voice soft. "I'm glad you're letting me help." Jake nodded slowly, closing his eyes again. "You make it easy." She stayed quiet for a second, touched but not wanting to embarrass him. She kept her arm around him, supporting his weight without complaint. Minutes passed. The barn lights flickered, the horses settled deeper into hay, and the soft sound of the wind brushing the walls made the space feel like its own small world. Jake let the silence wrap around him, feeling more at peace than he had all day. After a while, Elena spoke again. "Do you want to tell me what happened out there? Only if you feel like it." Jake hesitated. Talking about it made the pain feel more real, but something about her gentle tone made him nod. "There was a young bull," he said quietly. "Got spooked and ran off. Ruby and I tried to cut him off, but she slipped. Not her fault. The ground was slick. I just landed wrong." Elena listened without interrupting. She didn't blame him, didn't scold him, didn't tell him he should have been more careful. She simply absorbed the words with genuine understanding. "Falls happen," she said softly, "even to the best riders." Jake let out a breath that sounded a little like relief. "Everyone thinks I'm some kind of machine, like I don't break." "You're a person, Jake," she reminded him. "People break sometimes. They heal too." He swallowed, feeling something emotional press at the edges of his mind. Not sadness, something gentler, something like gratitude mixed with a feeling he didn't dare name. He shifted slightly, and Elena adjusted her arm so he could rest easier. "Does it still hurt badly?" she asked. "Yeah," he admitted, "but not as sharp. More like it's just there, and I'm tired." "You can rest," she said quietly. "I won't let you fall." Jake felt a small laugh escape him, very soft and careful. "You really mean that?" "I do." He leaned more fully against her then, not fighting it, not arguing, not pretending he didn't need the support. Elena kept him steady, her warmth comforting and real. After a moment, Elena spoke again, her tone soft and thoughtful. "Can I tell you something?" Jake opened his eyes. "Of course." "I noticed you struggling earlier today," she admitted. "You hid it well, but I could tell something wasn't right." He shook his head slightly. "I didn't think anyone saw." "I did," she said. "But I also saw that you kept going anyway. Not because you wanted to be tough, but because you care about this place. And because everyone depends on you." Jake stared at the floor, her words sinking in. "You don't have to carry everything alone," she continued gently. "The people here trust you. They'd help you if you let them." Jake's voice came out quiet, almost unsure. "I don't know how to let people help." Elena placed her hand lightly against his shoulder. "You're doing it right now." He went still at her words. She was right. He was letting someone help. He was leaning into somebody else's strength. He was showing the side of himself he usually kept hidden. And it didn't feel wrong. It didn't feel weak. It felt good. Jake turned his head slightly, careful with his ribs, and looked at her. "Thank you for not walking away." "I wouldn't," she said. "I don't walk away from people who need care." He felt his throat tighten again. He had been cared for in practical ways before. Bandages, help lifting heavy things, a pat on the back after a long day. But emotional care? Someone choosing to stay because they wanted to? That was rare, almost foreign to him. Elena gently changed the cool cloth against his ribs again. The slight chill eased the aching warmth under his skin. "Better?" she asked. "Much," he said softly. "Because you're here." Elena looked down at her hands, a soft blush warming her cheeks, but her voice stayed steady. "I'm happy to be here." Jake shifted a little more comfortably, leaning into her side again. "You smell like lavender," he said quietly, almost without thinking. She smiled faintly. "Hand lotion. Helps calm animals. It works on cowboys, too," he murmured. Elena laughed softly, and the sound warmed the air around them. They stayed like that, leaning into each other, sharing quiet words and quiet breaths. Jake felt the tension in his body soften little by little. Elena felt the weight of his trust settle gently against her. The night deepened, and the barn felt almost like a small world of its own. Jake didn't want to move. He didn't want her to leave. He didn't want the moment to end. He whispered, "I haven't felt this calm in a long time." Elena's voice was gentle. "You deserve calm, Jake. You deserve care." He closed his eyes again, letting the truth of her words sink in. For the first time in years, he believed them. The night had settled deep around the barn by the time Jake felt strong enough to sit up a little straighter. Elena helped him move slowly, making sure he didn't twist or bend too much. The cool cloth had eased the sharper edge of the pain, and leaning against her had helped more than he ever expected. But the stiffness in his ribs reminded him he wasn't healed, just comforted. Jake rubbed his eyes with the back of his hand, careful not to shift too much. "I must look terrible," he said quietly. Elena shook her head with a soft smile. "You look like someone who had a long day." "That's one way to put it," he murmured. She stood for a moment to stretch her legs, then sat beside him again, The barn was dim and peaceful, the lantern still glowing warmly above them. Jake watched her quietly, noticing how gentle her movements were, how calmly she carried herself. It wasn't the calm of someone pretending. Hers was natural, soft, and steady. "You should get some rest, too," Jake said, even though the thought of her leaving made something tighten in his chest. "I will," she replied, "but I'm not leaving you here alone while you're hurting." He looked down at his hands, surprised by how much those words meant to him. Earlier, he might have insisted he didn't need company. Now he didn't want her to go. Elena reached for her small medical bag. She always carried it when working with animals, but tonight she used it on him with the same care she gave any creature in need. "I can wrap your rib," she said. "It won't fix it, but it'll help keep everything in place until we get you checked by a doctor." "A doctor," Jake repeated with a sigh, as if the word itself weighed more than he did. Elena gave him a patient look. "Yes, a real doctor. Tomorrow morning." I know," he said. "You're right." She raised an eyebrow in playful surprise. "You admitted that very easily." He smiled slightly. "Don't expect it often." Elena laughed softly and began to prepare a bandage. Jake lifted his arm slowly as she wrapped the cloth around his ribs with gentle, careful hands. He winced at first, but the steady pressure actually made breathing easier. "There," she said, tying it neatly. "That should help a little." Jake exhaled slowly. "It does. Thank you." Elena sat beside him again, close enough that their shoulders brushed. She didn't move away, and neither did he. For a moment, they simply listened to the quiet of the barn, horses sighing, hay shifting, the wind whispering across the roof. The peacefulness settled between them like something warm and safe. Jake cleared his throat softly. "You know, you being here tonight meant more than you think." Elena looked at him with gentle eyes. "I'm glad I could help." "It's not just the help," he said. "People don't usually stay when things get hard." Her expression softened. "Then they didn't know you very well." Jake blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" Elena folded her hands in her lap and spoke quietly. "All week I watched you take care of everyone else. You worked long hours. You checked on the horses even after the others left. You didn't complain once. People like that? They don't deserve to face pain alone, not when someone can be there for them." Jake swallowed slowly. "It's been a long time since someone said anything like that." "Maybe it's about time someone did," she replied with a gentle smile. Jake felt the words settle deep inside him, somewhere he rarely let anyone reach. He wasn't used to being seen, not beyond the surface-level cowboy who could handle anything. Elena somehow saw the man underneath. He leaned back carefully, letting his shoulders relax. "I don't know how to repay you," he said. "You don't have to," Elena replied. "You just need to take care of yourself for once." Jake chuckled softly. "That's harder than it sounds." "Well," she said, "I'll remind you until you listen." He lifted an eyebrow. "Oh? You're planning on sticking around?" Elena's cheeks warmed slightly, but she held his gaze. "If you'll let me." Jake didn't hesitate. "I want you to." Silence settled between them again, but it wasn't awkward. It felt full of things unspoken but understood. After a moment, Elena stood and held out a hand. "Come on," she said. "Let's get you to your room. You shouldn't sleep in the barn tonight." Jake looked at her hand, then took it carefully, using it to rise. Even with her help, standing made him wince, and she stepped closer, slipping her arm gently around his back to keep him steady. "Easy," she reminded him. "Small steps." He nodded, letting her guide him out of the barn. The night was cool, but not cold, and the sky was full of stars. Jake moved slowly, leaning on her just enough to stay balanced. He had never let anyone help him walk before, not since he was a child, yet it didn't feel strange with her. They reached the ranch house, and Elena guided him inside. The warm glow from the hallway lights made everything calm. She walked with him to his room, keeping her arm around him until he sat carefully on the edge of his bed. "Do you need anything?" she asked. Jake thought for a moment. "Just for you to stay a little longer, if you can." Her expression softened, and she nodded. "Of course." She pulled a chair close to the bed and sat where he could see her easily. Jake lay back slowly, careful not to strain his ribs. Once he settled, he felt the room quiet around them, warm and safe. "Tomorrow," Elena said, "I'll drive you into town. We'll get your rib checked properly." Jake smiled tiredly. "I'll go. No arguments." "Good," she said with a playful nod. "That makes my job easier." They fell into a comfortable silence. Jake watched her for a moment, noticing how peaceful she looked in the soft light. He felt grateful, deeply grateful, that she had stayed when he needed someone most. "Elena," he said softly. "Yes?" "Thank you for caring." She gave him a gentle smile. "I care because you deserve care. You're important, Jake. You matter." Those words sank deep into him, warming places that had been cold for years. He whispered, "I'm glad I met you." Elena reached forward and rested her hand lightly on his arm. "I'm glad I met you too." Jake's eyes grew heavy. The long day, the pain, the comfort, all of it mixed together, making him finally feel ready to rest. Elena stayed with him, her presence calming him more than any medicine could. As sleep pulled at him, he whispered the last words he had strength for. "Will you be here in the morning?" Elena squeezed his arm gently. "Yes. I'll be right here." Jake closed his eyes, trusting her words completely. And for the first time in a long, long time, he drifted into sleep not alone, not hurting in silence, but held gently by the knowledge that someone cared enough to stay.